Alzheimer's should be a rare disease.
We now understand that Alzheimer's is a preventable disease in the first place.
You are not stuck with the brain you have. You can make your brain better.
Hello, I'm Peggy Sarlin, and today I'm in Los Angeles, California, where I have the great pleasure of speaking with Dr. David Perlmutter, the renowned author of Grain Brain and the Grain Brain Whole Life Plan. And Dr. Perlmutter has really revolutionized our understanding of brain health. His books have been translated into 27 languages. Dr. Perlmutter is a board-certified neurologist and a fellow of the American College of Nutrition. So neurology, nutrition, not a typical combination. He's the winner of the Linus Pauling Award for Neurological Innovations, and he's really a leader in educating the public about brain health. So, welcome, Dr. Perlmutter.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So, Doctor, you're here in Los Angeles chairing the conference of the Institute for Functional Medicine on the dynamic brain. So you're here with all these top brain experts. What are you hearing that's exciting and new that's going to get us optimistic about our brain health?
Well, I would say first, it's not going to get us optimistic. It's going to reinforce the fact that we are indeed quite optimistic now. The notion that the brain can grow new brain cells, for example, is brand new. That was only published in 1998. There had been this huge rejection of the notion that humans had a second chance. And only, the past few years have we understood not just that we have this opportunity to grow new brain cells, but in addition, we can enhance the process. These are brand new cells. They are stem cells in the brain. So in a sense, we are seeing that stem cell therapy is happening in you and me as we have this conversation. It happens when we are 80 years old, when we are 90 years old. It happens throughout our lifetime. So it's a very empowering notion because not only is it happening, but we can enhance the process through some very simple lifestyle changes.
So the whole notion of the brain is this kind of rusty engine that just deteriorates. It has been put by the wayside, and now it really is a paradigm shift. The brain is growing, it's new, it's continually in a state of rebirth, and people like you are figuring out, now that we know that it can be reborn, new cells, people like you are at the forefront of figuring out how to do it, how to get us to do it in a practical way.
That's right. And, this is research going on worldwide, that people are looking at how do you amplify the growth of new brain cells and, in addition, the differentiation of those brain cells so they become specialized. And even further, how do you amplify this process we call neuroplasticity that allows one cell to connect to another and redirect its growth, etc. So we know that one chemical that happens to be really fundamental mechanistically in making this happen, allowing it to happen, is called BDNF. Now that sounds a bit technical, but go with me on this.
Oh, I'm with you. Take me away on BDNF.
Is basically growth hormone for the brain. And when you have higher levels of BDNF, as research has demonstrated, you are resistant to getting Alzheimer's in the first place. Your rate of cognitive decline over many years, with the image that you mentioned earlier of a rusting brain really being something we will put by the wayside, higher levels of BDNF correlate with slower decline of the brain. And in fact, newer research correlates actual growth of the brain's memory center over 1 to 2 years in people with the highest level of BDNF. And that is revolutionary. We all sort of accept the notion that as we age, our brains will rust, as you mentioned, deteriorate and shrink and lose the ability to function. We now understand that just isn't true. And it's taken a lot for people to embrace this as it relates to the brain, because we still tend to cling to this notion that we peak out around 18 years of age. And then after that, we're all on the skids. You drink a beer and that's 30,000 brain cells. And the next thing you know, you're in deep trouble
That's so
when you're
depressing,
50 or
Matthew.
60 or 80. But that just isn't what our science is telling us anymore. And that is when we amplify this chemical BDNF, then we get a second chance. We suddenly turn things around and the brain regenerates itself. And that is clearly a revolutionary concept.
So let's stay with BDNF, which can we consider it almost a youth hormone? Is it?
Well, as it relates to the brain, you've got it, that's for sure.
So if BDNF is this magical elixir that's going to grow our brain cells for us, new brain cells, how do we be good to it? What are these lifestyle interventions that are going to encourage the production of it?
It's a great question because one thing that people are able to do to have higher levels of BDNF is very, very expensive. They have to go out and buy a pair of sneakers. And once they do, and not just buy the sneakers, but use their, in other words, aerobic exercise.
Specifically aerobic.
The most powerful way to change your DNA so that your DNA begins to express this protein, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, is exercise. And much of the research was done in Pittsburgh, but much was actually done right here in Los Angeles, where you and I are, at UCLA, demonstrating dramatic changes in memory, in the volume of the brain's memory center increasing, and all correlated with higher levels of BDNF in comparing those individuals who exercise versus those who do not. So while everybody knows that exercise makes you feel good,
makes you look better.
You develop endorphins, so you enjoy life. Maybe it's better for your bone density if you're a woman. But now we correlate your degree of participation in aerobic exercise with the growth of new brain cells, the increase in size of your brain's memory center, and better cognitive function. All you got to do is exercise. You know, there's such a push for this or that new proprietary drug, or this is in development, or putting connecting your brain to a computer and trying to upload information and all these new technologies. The bottom line is get out and huff and puff a little bit, and you're going to dramatically improve structurally what the brain looks like and functionally what your brain is able to do.
Well, you're specifying aerobic. So obviously, there's other kinds of exercise, and they may have merits, lifting weights.
Well, it turns out that resistance exercise is effective as well. And ultimately, what the main researchers, led by a guy named Dr. Kirk Erickson, have revealed is it's basically your caloric expenditure in doing whatever you like. It can be dancing, it can be walking, swimming, biking, jogging, you name it. But as long as you're burning calories, the more calories you burn, the better. So what an incredible thought it is that people get a second chance, that you can go out and have stem cell therapy today just by exercising.
Wow. Well, for people like me, because frankly, I don't like to exercise, so you're telling me I can keep my brain young and get this gorgeous BDNF flowing inside my brain structure. So that's motivating me, but I just want to do the bare minimum. So there's got to be other people like me out there.
Well, there are other people like you who may not wish to participate in aerobics, but I would, accept your statement, but do everything I could to convince you that you need to exercise. Why? Because as you sit here right now, you are at risk for Alzheimer's. If you live to be age 85, your risk is 50-50. You are a woman, that means your risk is much greater than mine. And certainly if there's a family history, indeed, your risk is even higher. We have no treatment, there's no pharmaceutical treatment that works for that disease that currently affects 5.4 million Americans and is costing us more than $230 billion a year. Having said that, I'm not going to accept your complaint that you don't like to exercise. However, I know where you're going with this, and I think it's to a place of, well, in addition, doctor, what else is there that scientific research has demonstrated will also raise BDNF? And there are actually a number of things. There are various herbs that have an effect on BDNF, like turmeric, for example. Turmeric, the Indian spice, upregulates BDNF, increases BDNF. The omega-3 called DHA works quite handily, which is why fish is considered brain food. There are new things that have been researched that are going to be available soon. For example, whole coffee fruit concentrate. What is that? When you buy your coffee beans, you're actually getting the seed of the coffee berry. But the rest of that coffee berry, the pulp of that fruit, has now been studied and is a powerful source of BDNF. Being on a diet that is more what we call keto, in other words, burning more fat than carbs generally, by its production of a chemical called beta-hydroxybutyrate, increases the body's BDNF, and also butyrate in general, a fat, if you will, a ketone, increases BDNF. Where do we get that? We get butyrate in our bodies from our gut bacteria fermenting fiber-rich foods that we may eat. So what did I just say? I just connected the gut bacteria to growing new brain cells, what we call the gut-brain connection. That a healthy gut array of bacteria, when they are fed appropriately with what we call prebiotic fiber, we'll talk about those foods in just a moment, produce a chemical called butyrate that actually speeds up the body's production of BDNF and helps you grow new brain cells. That is our powerful relationship between our cognitive future and the health of the bugs that live in the gut.
Which is a totally mind-blowing idea that you have really brought to public attention. I mean, I think you more than anybody else. So just going back to our theme here of consciously trying to structure our lives so we're promoting BDNF production in our brains. We know we're going to do exercise. Even if we don't want to, we're going to buy the sneakers. And we have to do it every day, 7 days a week?
I would love 7 days a week. Well, sometimes we travel and, or whatever, for whatever reason, it's not possible. But I have found that personally, it's always easy to make an excuse. But the truth of the matter is there's probably not a hotel that you might be in anymore that doesn't have some type of gym equipment. You can get out wherever you go, bring a pair of walking shoes with you, and always find time to get out. So I'm not going to let you off the hook. There are no excuses. I mean, if it's 6 days a week, that's fine.
Minutes a day?
I think 20 minutes is reasonable. New research is actually indicating closer to 45 minutes to an hour. So that is an investment in the future of your brain. And, if we're talking about reversing Alzheimer's, that's certainly one powerful component to the program. But if an individual has already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the truth of the matter is that there is limited availability to provide anything that is going to have a dramatic effect in terms of reversing it. Although now we're seeing that when we leverage multiple ideas, bringing in nutrition issues, hormone balancing, detoxification, aerobic exercise, the use, stabilization of certain blood parameters like homocysteine, vitamin D levels, for example. When multiple issues are considered, we do see that now it is able in many patients to reverse Alzheimer's disease. And it's a heck of a statement that a few years ago I wouldn't have been able to make, but it's now happening and it's very exciting. My mission, however, is to certainly fan the flames of that mentality. But beyond that, I believe what is much more important is to spread the word that we now understand that Alzheimer's is a preventable disease in the first place. While it's great that we target Alzheimer's in terms of therapeutic approaches, if we can keep it from happening in the first place, that makes a heck of a lot more sense. Because, once the house is on fire, people will come and try to put the fire out. But why don't we go through the house first of all and make sure we didn't leave the iron on and that the fireplace doesn't have some burning embers, and then we're able to walk away peacefully. We can prevent Alzheimer's by and large. Individuals, for example, who engage in aerobic exercise may have as much as a 50% reduction for that very disease for which there is no pharmaceutical fix. Individuals who do not develop Type 2 diabetes may have as much as a 50% reduction in the risk for Alzheimer's. A new study published in the journal JAMA Neurology showed that those people who chronically take acid blocking drugs called proton pump inhibitors that everybody thinks they need to take have a 44% increased risk for developing Alzheimer's type dementia.
That very scary.
It's scary. It's information that needs to get out. And again, it's not that you're just interviewing Dr. Perlmutter today and he comes up with these ideas. That was published in the journal JAMA Neurology, put out by the American Medical Association. We need to talk about that stuff.
And if you go to your doctor and he gives you this medication, is he going to say to you, by the way, this is dramatically increasing your risk of Alzheimer's? I mean, does it come with a warning?
I think it's extremely unlikely. I lectured yesterday to a very large audience of healthcare providers. And when I put up that data, nobody in the audience seemed to have ever seen it.
Really?
And so it is our mission to get that information out. It's published data, an extremely large study showing not only an increased risk for Alzheimer's, but also a dramatically increased risk for other issues, including not that particular study, but a Stanford study demonstrated a 16% increased risk for heart attack and doubling of the risk of death from that event. So
how dreadful.
Yes, so we really need to do our best. You know, the word doctor doesn't mean healer, it means teacher. So the mission, by and large, is getting out there in venues like this and letting people know the other side of the story that you're not going to see on the commercial when you watch the evening news. It's all about, in the case of these proton pump inhibitors, acid indigestion, or you can't eat a certain food, take this pill and the world is going to be a better place.
Right.
That's not reality.
That's not
reality is you've increased your risk for Alzheimer's by about 44%.
I'm just kind of curious. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but because I keep coming back to BDNF because it seems to be so central to everything. Would these medications affect discourage the production of BDNF? Is that the mechanism?
It's a terrific question. And what we know is that there is this balance going on in the body between, on the one hand, the growth of new brain cells stimulated by BDNF, and on the other hand, a mechanism called inflammation. So that's the balance. When we do things that increase inflammation, we compromise the brain's vitality, the brain's ability to rejuvenate itself. On the other hand, when we are exercising, taking turmeric, taking DHA, whole coffee fruit concentrate, then we are enhancing the brain's ability to rejuvenate itself and to resist decline, i.e. reduce our risk for Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative conditions.
So it's interesting that you said a few years ago you couldn't have made the statement that it's now possible to actually reverse Alzheimer's, but now it is because of this programmatic way that you're looking at it. It's not the magic pill. It's you're going to address this issue, this imbalance, this problem here. And that's what you've been laying out with us in parallel with the production of BDF. You've been a series of programs. So just to keep reviewing, we're going to exercise, and then we're going to take supplements. You mentioned, I mean, that is a good idea, right? You know, the whole subject of supplements is so confusing because every doctor has their own particular favorites, and it can get expensive and confusing to people. So if you were putting together like the equivalent of, you know, a basic wardrobe, the jeans, the navy blaze, you know, what's your basic wardrobe of BDNF?
Well, the first very, very important supplement, probably on the top of the list of all the supplements you would add, would be one called exercise. And I'm not going to let it go. I am just not going to let it go because it is hugely powerful from a mechanistic perspective when we see the research that shows increasing size of the brain's memory center and improved memory with just one intervention, and that is aerobic exercise. Yes, growth of the hippocampus in those who exercise. And the resistance to Alzheimer's. I mean, what more could a person want to hear in a venue like this? But beyond that, I believe that we've got to maximize our understanding of the importance, for example, of vitamin D. People will go to the doctor and he or she will check a blood level for vitamin D, and people will walk out being told they are in the normal range. And that is not meaningful or really very appropriate anymore. Because in the normal range doesn't really tell you that you've optimized your situation, but you might just be scraping by. So if the normal range is between 30 and 90 or 30 to 100, depending on the lab, and you have a 32, your doctor may say, well, you're in the normal range, go home, everything's fine. That's not what's best for you. You're scraping by. So we'd like vitamin D levels up, towards the top end, up around 80 or 90. We want to make sure that your blood test for homocysteine, for example, is low. We don't like homocysteine levels that are high because performed scientific research has correlated elevated levels of this amino acid, if you will, homocysteine, with higher risk for Alzheimer's and shrinkage of the brain's memory center. We want to make sure that your average blood sugar is lower, called the A1C. Many people are familiar with that. Well-published research has demonstrated that the higher the A1C, the greater is the decline in size of your hippocampus. So we want to make sure your A1C is lower, in that your average blood sugar is lower. Fasting insulin should be low. These are all important parameters that are really straightforward. There's nothing exotic that a doctor wouldn't be able to check these. Certainly there are other more exotic and perhaps a little bit more challenging laboratory studies, like looking at toxicology, looking at hormone levels, etc., that I think are very important as well, but might not be an area of familiarity for most typical doctors or even neurologists who may be seeing patients at risk for cognitive decline, or those patients who already have mild cognitive impairment. They are nonetheless very, very important. They're not typically on the menu at the standard neurological evaluation.
Right.
But we're hoping to change that. We're hoping to, spread the recognition that these parameters can have important roles to play in determining the destiny of a person's brain. And not only are they interesting to look at, but much more importantly, they can be fixed. They provide information about actionable information here about what you can do. If vitamin D is low, here's how you fix it. Then recheck it. If the homocysteine is high, you take the B6, B12, and folic acid and repeat your study to make sure it is normalized. If the C-reactive protein is elevated, let's engage dietary changes, etc., to reduce inflammation and follow the C-reactive protein as a marker of that inflammation. We will look at lipopolysaccharide, LPS, as a marker of leakiness of the gut and inflammation. Again, tying gut health to brain health, which for me as a neurologist is certainly nothing that was in the playbook just a few years ago. So the point is, there is no silver bullet here. As
Right.
Dr. Bredesen likes to talk about, it's silver buckshot, meaning there are multiple areas that need to be paid attention to in order to bring about change. The brain doesn't decline just because one thing is askew. Multiple things conspire to create an environment in which the brain then is unable to thrive. That said, you have to target as many of those entities as possible if you're going to reverse Alzheimer's disease.
Speaking of the real world, and the situations people actually run into as they try to implement this. So older people are the people who are more at risk of cognition problems. And so exercise would be great for them, but they might have they might have back problems, they might have knee problems. How are you going to help them get the exercise they need? Give us advice for those people.
It's a terrific question. And, I would say that there are some excuses just now that have been put forth, and I'm not buying it. I mean, I'm in the gym next to people who have terrible knee issues with multiple knee operations, and they're on a machine that allows them to become aerobic based on using their upper extremities. It's like a bicycle for the arms. There's so many things that people are able to do. Some people are terribly out of shape and unable to tolerate going out and jogging 3 miles. I understand that.
Right.
But you could jog 2 miles or 1 mile or walk 1 block or walk from your front door to the mailbox as a start, or walk from the bedroom back into the living room a couple of times to start. There's always a way to do more than you're doing right now. But the notion of being so sedentary for 11 hours a day is leading to a brain that's going to be just not functional, and more importantly, at much more risk for decline. And, that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. Okay, so let's go. We know in our program we've got exercise, we've got supplements, and we know we're going to eat great. So, and that involves the care and feeding of our gut bacteria.
Exactly. I mean, that was a very powerful statement just now. We're going to eat right, and it involves the care and feeding of our gut bacteria. So it is really a new perspective. I wrote a book called Brain Maker that really deals with the important role of gut bacteria in brain health. Who knew? Well, who knows are the scientists from around the world who have now recognized this critical role of our gut bacteria in determining the health of the human brain. And it's a very humbling but yet empowering bit of science to embrace, because it opens the door to our ability to leverage this science and create programs that will enhance brain health. Our gut bacteria really determine the set point of inflammation in the human body. When we recognize that inflammation is a primary feature of brain degeneration in Alzheimer's, in Parkinson's, in Huntington's, in multiple sclerosis, in autism, targeting inflammation at its source is really something that becomes of fundamental importance. Again, inflammation has its genesis as a consequence of changes in the gut bacteria. This leads to increased permeability of the gut lining, and that allows a variety of things, including bacteria themselves, to get through the gut lining and challenge the immune system, creating the chemical mediators of inflammation that do get into the brain and begin this process that leads to brain cells virtually committing suicide, a process called apoptosis, in which these cells basically just die, and we suffer decline as a consequence of that. On the other side of that scale is the growth of new brain cells, which is enhanced by anything that will enhance BDNF, as we talked about.
So what we eat determines the health of our brain. I mean, it's just so basic.
It is, and it's kind of cute to talk about that, but I can assure you that that notion is founded and supported by our most well-respected scientific institutions publishing in the most well-respected peer-reviewed journals. As an example, in a recent publication in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, what a name for a journal, researchers from the Mayo Clinic looked at the diets of individuals and basically asked, what do these people eat and what was their risk of developing dementia? And what they found was really quite interesting, that those individuals who favored carbohydrates as their highest source of calorie input had about an 80 to 85% increased risk of developing dementia. Those individuals whose diets favored more fat as a caloric resource had about a 44% risk reduction in terms of Alzheimer's dementia. So that tells you that this idea of castigation of fat as for dietary input, which has really quite characterized the American recommendations and spread across the globe, was really off base, at least as it relates to the brain. And now we know really as it relates to the health of the human body, including heart health. We've eaten fat as a powerful source of calories for a couple of million years. Suddenly, 30 years ago, fat was demonized.
The villain.
That's
the
right. We were
villain.
told eat low fat, no fat,
Right,
this and that.
right.
and which by default cause people to eat more carbs. Rates of heart disease and diabetes and cancer and Alzheimer's have gone up dramatically since that has been the dogma.
Right.
And now, gratefully, even the United States dietary recommendations have changed, indicating that really the biggest problem in our diet has been the sugar and the carbs all along and not the fat. Which is not to say that certain fats are dangerous. Certainly they are. The vegetable fats, the corn oils, and safflower oils that line the grocery store shelves are really to be avoided because they're not good for us. They do increase inflammation. But fish oil, the oils that are found in nuts and seeds, grass-fed beef, wild fish, for example, are terrific for us because they actually can help us reduce inflammation, and many of those oils do, in fact, increase BDNF. Why wouldn't we want to have those on board? The other really critically important part of the puzzle relates back to something we mentioned earlier, and that is nurturing the gut bacteria. We nurture our gut bacteria and reduce inflammation and cater to the brain by having higher levels in our diets of what is called prebiotic fiber.
And most
Not
of us
just
don't
fiber.
know them.
Sure.
But this is a new concept to many people.
Well, everyone's heard that fiber-rich foods are good for us because they're good for digestion and who knows what else.
But the prebiotic phrase
The prebiotic
is new
phase,
to many
exactly.
people.
Prebiotic sort of sounds like probiotic.
Right.
And it's good that they sound similar. Why? Because they're very much in the same camp. Probiotics are the good bacteria, and prebiotics are what they eat. So we get prebiotic fiber from eating prebiotic fiber-rich foods like Mexican yam, which is jicama, garlic, onions, leeks, dandelion greens, asparagus. Those are foods rich in prebiotic fiber, chicory root. But more importantly, as part of the nutritional supplement program, you can go to your favorite health food store and stand there and say, I want some prebiotic fiber, and they'll likely provide you a product that's made from acacia gum. Acacia is the big canopy tree in Africa where you see the giraffe in the noonday sun seeking shelter, and that tree secretes a gum, a resin that is sustainably harvested, powdered, put in a bag, and ends up on the health food store shelf. You take a teaspoon twice a day of that prebiotic fiber, and you're nurturing your gut bacteria, allowing them to produce this chemical I mentioned earlier called butyrate, which is just manna for the brain.
So maybe in our basic wardrobe of supplements that we were talking about, which had turmeric and fish oil, right, and maybe vitamin D, maybe we should add to our basic list a prebiotic
sure. I wasn't done with that, that's for sure.
Oh, okay.
So that's a great list that you're developing.
Yeah, okay.
And let's just recap for a moment. It would be a DHA, the omega-3.
Omega-3.
Found in fish and fish oils. There is
Or
even
krill oils
krill
or-
oil, even
yeah.
a vegetarian form that's on the market. That's really fundamental, even for children. The richest source of DHA in nature is human breast milk.
Oh, well,
so
that tells you
just
something
gives you a
about-
sense about
yeah,
how
uh-huh.
important that is for the brain. Vitamin D, I think, is critically important.
How much, by the way, for
Well, again, that depends on the blood test. So there's a little bit of manipulation, a little bit of integration that has to happen with you as an individual. You might be out in the sun day in and day out with no clothes on, running around your neighborhood, in which case you're
Unlikely.
making vitamin D. On the other hand, you may live in the Northeast or the Northwest where you're not getting a lot of sun exposure in the winter, wearing a lot of clothing, and therefore your body's not manufacturing vitamin D. You'll need more than somebody who...
So what would be the range? I mean, a range for somebody who's, let's say, in the Northeast, not outside, working
again,
a desk job.
people who
yeah.
begin taking vitamin D should have their levels followed.
Okay.
Taking 2,000 IU a day for you might be enough, but might not be enough for me. I might need 5,000 or even 10,000 units
Wow.
a day.
That's
Who
a lot.
knows? It isn't a lot.
Oh, okay.
It might be just right. 1,000 units is not a little. It might be just right. But the only way you're going to know is by blood testing.
Okay, so that's important.
Similarly, we know that the B vitamins are really important because they lower homocysteine. But, for example, if your homocysteine is very high, like 18, you would need more of those B vitamins following the homocysteine level until it normalizes. So that's where we apply a little bit of interventional science. and medicine into this relationship.
You're not just guessing scattershot
Right.
how much
It's personalized medicine.
It's personalized medicine. It's the future.
Not what I need, but what do you need?
Yeah, that's
and how
the
do I
future.
know what you need? Real simple. We have wonderful laboratory studies that'll tell me right now what you need. So vitamin D, important. Turmeric, been studied. Actually, one of the prime researchers, Dr. Cole, is located right here in Los Angeles, has researched turmeric in its multiple activities. We know that turmeric increases BDNF. It helps to reduce the load of plaque in the brain, at least in laboratory animals. We know that people who have higher levels of turmeric in their diets, by virtue of the fact that they eat a lot of curried foods, have a lower risk for dementia as well. These are all interesting, sidelights that I think play into the notion that turmeric is really important for the brain. And that's brand new information. It was only just published 2,000 years ago in the Vedic texts that turmeric is good for
Only
your vitality
2,000
and also for
years.
your brain.
Only 2,000
I
years.
think alpha lipoic acid is an important supplement.
ALA.
NAC, N-acetylcysteine, coenzyme Q10, very important. I think that there is clearly a role for a very high quality probiotic supplement with multiple strains, 10, 15 strains of bacteria, as well as a high concentration, 30 billion, 50 billion colony forming units, or that's what you want to look for on the label. But the most important thing to look for on the label of a probiotic is its stability. Is it delivering to you those organisms after 6 months, after
How
a
do
year?
you know?
Well, one thing you can look for is if they say, well, our product has 30 billion at the time of manufacture.
30 billion.
Well-
These numbers are staggering. Okay.
Well, they're not. These are microscopic organisms.
Right.
So it might say at the time of manufacture, but I want 30 billion units to be guaranteed for me as long as I have that product on the shelf and I'm taking it.
Okay.
So that's one thing you would look for. I think non-GMO is also a plus. And not to underestimate the importance of prebiotic fiber, especially as we are talking about what you would add to your nutritional supplements. And that's a new player, a new kid on the block, because people haven't really heard about this. But to nurture your gut bacteria with prebiotic fiber, great. Eat those foods that I enumerated earlier. But in addition, we know that you really need to help that along because you can't eat enough prebiotic fiber by doing it just by food. You're really going to have to eat an awful lot of Mexican yam, garlic, onions, leeks. Take the fiber. And again, there are a lot of things. One of the most exciting is this whole coffee fruit concentrate.
Is it available on the market now?
It
Can
is,
I go to
it will be available,
to my health
yes.
food? It will be, or
It will be very, very soon. The research is out now. I, in fact, at this conference, have had put some slides up and talked about how exciting that is. But we're seeing that's going to be available in health food stores. So it's called whole coffee fruit concentrate, and indeed along the lines of exercise, DHA, turmeric is yet another player in terms of increasing BDNF. Now there is one other supplement that is now getting a lot of attention, and it is sage.
Yes,
everybody
sage.
grows sage. You see it. People have it in their gardens. There's a couple of forms. There's one called Sage officinalis, which is common sage. That's the Latin name. And there's a bucket of research now showing that that's good for the brain as well. It actually has some activity that works along the lines to increase a certain brain transmitter called acetylcholine. But like the other things I've mentioned, it too enhances BDNF. So we'll see more about sage in the future, but there are supplements of sage that you can go to your health food store right now. Various brands put it out, and you could take that and it's good for your brain.
So that's very good to know. It's not, you didn't name that many. We're not too intimidated. And just going back to the whole idea of what we're supposed to eat on a daily basis, you've been so key to educating the public about low carb, higher fat. And is there a resistance you run into? Do people feel like Are there misconceptions about the needs for carbohydrates? Like, oh, you're hurting your body by depriving
Well, we
it
all
of
grew up
carbs.
in a time where we're told, well, you need to have a candy bar before you take your SATs. Why? Because the brain needs a lot of glucose. And, that was one of those things that was sort of indelible, wasn't it? That dietary fat was bad. Remember those days?
Yeah.
And your brain needs glucose. Well, as a matter of fact, the human brain functions far more efficiently and ultimately better when it is powering itself with fat and not sugar. So this notion of loading up with sugar because it's good for your brain is contrary to what our best research is telling us. In the long run, when you're eating sugar and your blood sugar ultimately continues to rise, that is hugely threatening for your brain. In a study that appeared in the New England Journal in September of 2013, they took a group of about 3,000 individuals and they simply checked their blood sugar at the beginning of the study. They followed them for several years. Then they went back and they determined who developed dementia and who did not. And what they found was that those who developed dementia had higher blood sugar at the beginning of the study. And what was really compelling was their blood sugars weren't really anything that most doctors would worry about, 100 to 105. 105 blood sugar was already associated with increased risk for dementia. Blood sugar elevation happens when we eat sugar. So we've got to stop eating this white powder that is more addictive than other white powders that people were so fearful of in terms of addiction throughout the years. This is the most worrisome white powder on the planet, and that is sugar. And people really need to be aware of hidden sources of sugar, like a glass of orange juice. Your 12-ounce glass of OJ has 9 teaspoons of sugar. So those 36 grams of carbs are really detrimental, especially if you're trying to limit your carbs to 60 to 80 a day. 2 glasses of orange juice in the morning, you've already hit your level of carbs for the entire day. Not to say that all carbs are bad. Complex carbohydrate, like the type we get in prebiotic fiber, is of course really good for the brain. So what do people do when they hear this messaging about avoiding sugar?
Right.
I shouldn't be drinking sugar-sweetened sodas. So what would be a good choice? Diet drinks. Well, does that make sense? Just 6 weeks ago, a study was published showing that those individuals who drink 1 or more diet drink a day, artificially sweetened, no sugar, no calories, almost triple their risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. Have an incredibly,
so scary.
at least double their risk for diabetes, and have a huge increased risk for becoming obese by drinking a beverage with no sugar and no calories. The reason is because of the dramatic changes that occur from artificial sweetener consumption on the gut bacteria. So it all comes back to roost, doesn't it?
Is there any beverage that we can drink that will promote BDNF?
That will promote BDNF. Well, a great beverage to drink is water. Fruit-flavored water, I think, is terrific. There are drinks that you see at the health food store that have lots of turmeric in them. Ashwagandha,
Oh, there you go.
see. There is drinking kombucha, for example, which helps the gut bacteria. It's a bit of a probiotic type of drink. And as I've mentioned now, the role of the gut bacteria in creating this chemical called butyrate, which enhances BDNF production. So sure, drink kombucha. I prefer to water it down. Tea, coffee. Coffee is a wonderful way in the morning of increasing your body's production of beta-hydroxybutyrate, another form of butyrate. It's the reason that the keto diet, becoming in ketosis, has become so popular, because people are seeing really dramatic changes in their health when they finally get off the sugar and carbs and eat more fat.
The last time we spoke, you told me that you start your day with just coffee, and I think you put coconut oil in it.
I do.
And now I
often
do that. That's my breakfast.
Well, there you go. And you're doing, this study was published 6 weeks ago on the role of caffeine consumption in terms of increasing the production of this butyrate, beta-hydroxybutyrate. Having said that, I don't want people to get the message that while a cup of coffee is good, That doesn't necessarily mean that these creative drinks that you'll get at the coffee shop with the whipped cream and
sugar.
and all these things are going to be good for you. That's
Artificial
not,
flavors,
yeah,
all
that's
that
not
stuff.
your cup of coffee. There's one that's offered at a very popular coffee global store. Something Eno or Chino, I don't know what it is. I'm not going to say what it is, but nonetheless, it has 70 grams of sugar and 76 grams of carbs in one. So that will not help you get into
that
ketosis.
is not brain-friendly
and it's not
food.
well said.
Well, with your emphasis on fats, you're taking us into the area of ketones and the ketogenic diet, and is that something you recommend? And
I think that spending some time in ketosis on a daily basis is something most people do anyway. You know, generally you wake up in a mild state of ketosis. Let's see if we can protract that, and that is to say by not having breakfast, for example. Wow, that, you know, I'm certainly sounding iconoclastic, saying that we shouldn't eat breakfast. Didn't Mom tell you that that's the most important meal of the day and load us up with carbs so that we could go to school and do well? You know, the short stack of pancakes with the maple syrup, which
That was Mom
probably,
love.
probably never maple syrup in the first place. But that said, the longer we can extend the nighttime fast, I think is good. Have breakfast a couple days a week. Have it 5 days a week. But take a couple of days each week and don't have breakfast. Have your first meal at noon or 2 o'clock. Your body will thank you for that. And you'll reestablish a connection with what it feels like to be hungry. So few people these days really ever experience hunger anymore. So it's good to reestablish a signaling mechanism in your body that tells you it's time to eat, as opposed to breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 3 meals a day. Somebody invented that. It didn't just happen. Because, you know, there has been efforts on both sides of the story saying, well, we shouldn't have 3 meals a day. We should have 6 meals a day.
Break it down into little
right,
ones.
so that our blood
yeah.
sugar doesn't spike and our insulin levels don't spike, and it'll cause you to have less risk for insulin resistance. And others, like myself, are saying, miss a meal here and there. Fast for an entire day. Good for you. It's a low level of stress on your body that we call hormesis that's actually good for you. It allows certain life-sustaining genes to express themselves and code for chemicals that are antioxidant, that are detoxicant, that are increasing your ability to deal with inflammation. This is a good thing to do, and it emulates what the diets of our ancestors must have been like.
They didn't have refrigerators.
They didn't
filled.
have, you know, hunting and gathering doesn't mean hunting down a convenience store and gathering up all of the chips. There are times when our hunter-gatherer forebears didn't have a meal. They weren't going to stop chasing the gazelle to hunt it down because it's lunchtime and we're on break. It didn't happen that way. You went until you finally were able to achieve food.
And that's what our bodies are designed to do.
That's right. Well, it's what our genes expect. Our lifestyle, and particularly our foods, influence moment to moment our gene expression. So by missing a meal, we change the expression of our genome to allow the expression of genes that help code for longevity and brain preservation.
You know, I want to go back to something you said. You used the word stress. You said if we do this kind of extended fast, we're lessening the stress on our body. In your book, I should say your very fine book, The Grain Brain Whole Life Plan, you talk about stress in the brain and the necessity of getting a handle on stress so that it doesn't corrode the brain, essentially. So can you help us understand that?
Delighted to. You know, it's a stressful world in which we live.
Yes.
And when we are under stress, it is really dysfunctional for the brain. If you want to be mechanistic about it, we know that higher levels of stress are associated with higher levels of a chemical called cortisol. What does cortisol do? Cortisol increases the leakiness of the gut, which amplifies inflammation. It changes the array of organisms in the gut, so it changes the bacterial diversity that we have for the worse. And higher levels of cortisol are directly toxic to the brain's memory center, as was wonderfully described by Dr. Robert Sapolsky, also out here in California.
Oh, this is
the place to be.
This is the brain place.
So what can you do? You can turn off the TV, You can reduce your engagement with all of the stressful news that is everywhere we turn.
Yeah, it's hard to turn it off.
Here we are.
We're being bombarded with it.
Sure. I mean, you go to a hotel, you're going to take the elevator downstairs to go to a conference, and even like you might miss something. In the elevator is a television on with the news about how
none of which is good.
how terrible the world is.
Yeah.
So offload stress by engaging in meditation, by engaging in exercise, and by disengaging from the bombardment that we get day in and day out by the threats that are clearly out there that we just don't need to engage. The other thing that's really vitally important, and as it relates to brain health, is getting restorative sleep. It's so highly underrated, rather. The notion that sleep makes you feel good, great. But sleep is a brain tonic. And it's really important to recognize that the quality of our sleep matters in ways that are almost undescribable. People may think that they're sleeping well, but in reality, the 5 hours that they're getting a night isn't enough. Or they may think they're sleeping for 8 hours, but in reality that sleep is very interruptive and not restorative. The only way you're going to know is by going and having a sleep study. I did it.
You mean everybody should do it?
Absolutely.
Everybody should have a sleep study.
It's very, very important. You talked about the Brain Whole Life Plan, and
Yeah.
it's in the book. Why? Because you may be going to sleep at a reasonable hour, waking up at a reasonable hour. You got your 8 to 10 hours of sleep thinking, well, I'm doing what I can. But in reality, you may be arousing several times during the night, multiple times during the night. And this is really not going to be the restorative type of sleep that your brain needs to clean up, to consolidate memory, and to rid itself of accumulated debris, which happens during sleep, that would otherwise compromise brain function. You may have sleep apnea, where you stop breathing and ultimately gasp for air, arousing you, taking you out of deep restorative sleep, but you don't even know it. How will you know?
Your partner might know it.
Your partner might know it, or your partner, he or she, may be sleeping through the night and not paying any attention. But this is really important because, again, you don't know it. Your partner might not know it. Have a sleep study.
Okay, what's the relationship between sleep and BDNF? We got to bring everything back
That's
to
a very
BDNF.
interesting relationship. That chronic issues with sleep are related to compromised BDNF, but in the very, very short run, as in 1 or 2 nights of sleep deprivation, strangely, BDNF is actually increased. Now, I'm not recommending to increase BDNF by depriving yourself of sleep.
No.
But it's much like caloric restriction or fasting, that in the short run, a level of stress seems to be good for us.
We're not meant to have life too easy.
No, we're not. And it's like weightlifting. Weightlifting acutely, when you're at the gym and you're doing curls, you're tearing fibers. You're breaking down your muscle. And what happens is that stress over the next 36 hours rebuilds those muscle fibers and then a little bit more. That's how weightlifting leads to increased size and strength, is because it repairs the problem, but then goes one step further.
Right.
And it's very similar with fasting and aerobic exercise and sleep deprivation. But if you were to do curls, for 16 hours, your biceps would be destroyed. Similarly, if you were to overdo it on the sleep deprivation, then there's a sweet spot.
Right.
When you exceed the sleep spot night after night, and you don't even know it, that is profoundly detrimental for the brain and is associated with increased risk for Alzheimer's. Those individuals who have sleep apnea have a dramatically increased risk for Alzheimer's. So all the things that we've been talking about are looking at what is good for the brain, but also in the background should be this poster of preventing that disease in the first place. There's nothing really heroic as a medical doctor about preventing something from happening in the first place. We as medical doctors are called in when there's a problem already, so we can be the heroes and cure the disease or operate on the patient and fix the problem. But the reality is that preventing disease makes the best sense because then it doesn't manifest. It makes the best sense economically because we're going to be spending less healthcare dollars on treating people. And the whole notion of healthcare dollars is really interesting because by and large that has nothing to do with health. These programs that
Right.
are created in Washington, and whether it survives or doesn't survive, truthfully, has very little to do with health. It's an illness-based program. How will we take care of people when they develop X, Y, or Z, whether acutely in an emergency situation or chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and Alzheimer's? What can we do to help these people? I think that's noble, but I think much more important is the notion of keeping people healthy in the first place.
Well, you use the term hero, that the doctor's the hero because he rushes in and...
Or she.
Or she, yes. Doctors rush in and cure this dramatic problem, and then you're the hero. But I think you're the hero. I mean, they're heroes too, but I think you're the hero by educating. You call yourself an empowering neurologist because you empower us with the knowledge to take care of our own brains. And so I think that's quite heroic. You've been bringing us information that really nobody else has, and you've certainly been popularizing it in a way that nobody else has.
Well, empowerment, it happens when we receive knowledge. And that is the mission, because once you have the knowledge, then you can take action. So have the knowledge, take the action, then reap the benefits. That's the mission.
I want to bring, we're getting towards the end, but I want to bring up something you stress in your book, The Brain Whole Life Plan, and you stress the importance of gratitude, of approaching life with gratitude as an antidote to stress and to depression, which is correlated, of course, with Alzheimer's. Talk to us about gratitude.
Well, I think it's an often overlooked part of the puzzle here, and we talked about stress and sleep and supplements and diet and physical activity.
Right.
Your brain actually changes when you express and act on your feelings of gratitude. Research has demonstrated that. I think that gratitude is the antidote to the detrimental effects of stress. When we are in conflicting environments, that is stressful. That is really kind of what underlies stress, is when we're in an environment that is conflicting with what would otherwise be peaceful for us. And I think that a surefire way to get out of that situation is to rework your day-to-day mentality to a state of gratitude, and not just being grateful for all that is going on, but acting on it and giving back. Now, I'm going to tell you that of all the things we've talked about, this really has probably the least scientific underpinning. I think that will change, but this is one that comes from me as an intuitive recommendation as opposed to a scientific-based recommendation, which truthfully has supported everything we've talked about thus far. So maybe this is getting away from the science of medicine to the art of medicine. And this now becomes Dr. Perlmutter speaking from what I feel rather than what I have, what my rational mind has allowed me to put forth.
Understood. When you talk about gratitude and the importance of gratitude, it's something I think we literally feel in our gut. And you've talked about the importance of the gut bacteria, the connection to the brain. We know in our gut if we feel content, if we feel satisfied, if we're in a place of negativity, or if we're in a place of feeling grateful and connected in a positive way in the world. It's really, we feel it in our gut. And so that's kind of an argument. You said it's not scientific, but it's something I think we intuitively feel physically.
I'll tell you an interesting example, that experience that I had recently. We were hiking in Utah. My wife and I, we came upon on the trail a sign, and the sign had an arrow going left and an arrow going right. And the arrow going left said for climbers, and the arrow going right said for hikers. Huh. And I could have lamented the fact that I didn't feel comfortable being the climber anymore.
Right.
but instead I was grateful for the fact that I can still be the hiker.
You can still be the hiker, and your wife is with you to hike with you. There's
Right.
a lot to be grateful
so
for.
it is being grateful for what you can do, not what you can't do. If you can't run the 3 miles, be grateful for the fact that you can walk out of your front door and get to the mailbox. So it's really embracing and celebrating the glass half full, what you can achieve in this world, what you can do, as opposed to lamenting what no longer is available.
Well, when you talk about can do, what we can do is do the program that you laid out for it. The responsibility is on us. It's our own brains. And the responsibility is for us to take the knowledge that you've empowered us with and to make it our own. And so let me just leave you with this question. It's the Grain Brain Whole Life Plan. So we have to talk to us about that. It's a plan. How do we get ourselves to plan? We know we have to do this in order to take care of our brains. How do we go about planning?
That's what the plan is all about. And it's about what are the things we take? How do we change our diets? Why is sleep so important? What is the importance of gratitude? What about nutritional supplements? What about this whole idea of nurturing our gut bacteria? That's what went into the book. And really, I wrote a book called Grain Brain. And Grain Brain focused on carbohydrates and sugar as well as gluten. Following that, I wrote Brain Maker that focused on the gut bacteria. Those books were much more about the why. Why is the science telling us? What is it telling us is important? The new book is really about the how. Now, how do we leverage that information and create a plan so that day to day we know we are nurturing our health and specifically nurturing our brain. Now, I'm going to do something that's really quite unusual for an interview, and that is I'm going to ask you, now that we've spent this time together, what will change with you as you move forward, having had this interview with me and hearing this information?
Okay, well, I'll say the last interview that we did, I changed because you told me about your breakfast, that it was coffee with coconut oil. And you said you could go till 11 or noon or 1. And I thought, you must be so hungry. But I've begun doing that. I add butter to it. And that's my breakfast. And I can indeed go till 11 or noon. So you already changed me. You know what I'm going to say.
I know what you're going to say.
I'm going to exercise. I'm going to put on James Brown.
I feel good.
I feel good. And I'm going to dance. That's what I'm going to do.
Good.
So, I promise you. You have my word.
Okay. The next interview we do, I'm going to check up on you.
Yeah, you're going to check.
Terrific.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Perlmutter,
My pleasure.
for your time.
My pleasure.
Lots
Absolutely.
of luck at the conference. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a lot from Dr. Perlmutter today. A lot of this information is in his book, which is a terrific book, The Grain Brain Whole Life Plan. And you'll hear more specifics here to reinforce your motivation to do all the brain-friendly things that Dr. Perlmutter described today. Thank you for watching. Hi, it's Peggy Sarlin, back at our Regain Your Brain main office. Tomorrow is the last day of our video series. Interviewing all these distinguished men and women was an exciting journey for me, and I hope watching it has changed your life for the better. We saved the best to last. Tomorrow's interview could make history, the kind of thing where you'll be able to tell people you were there, you were one of the first to know. Dr. Michael Fossel is a research scientist at the forefront of the Alzheimer's revolution. He's developed a completely new medical treatment that he thinks will reverse and even outright cure Alzheimer's disease. It's a simple injection that resets the aging clock in certain critical brain cells. You only need to get the injection once, and then maybe every 5 years or so you get another one to reset that aging clock again. I know this may sound like science fiction, so let me tell you, it's already worked like gangbusters in animals, and soon it will be entering human trials. And by the way, this isn't a vaccine, it's a totally new approach. Can this be for real? It not only can be, but it is. Dr. Fossel is a distinguished scientist at the highest levels of the research establishment. He got his MD and his PhD at Stanford University and taught neurobiology there. He served as executive director of the American Aging Association and was founding editor of a scientific journal called Rejuvenation Research. He's the real deal. And what he's going to reveal tomorrow has the potential to shake the world to its foundations and to change all of our lives for the better. You don't want to miss this last episode, because if this treatment succeeds in human trials, you're going to want to be first in line to get it. I know I will. Check your email tomorrow at 9 a.m. for the link. Like previous episodes, it will be available free for 24 hours. I'll see you then.
Please consider supporting our important mission by choosing to own a copy of Regain Your Brain for yourself. You'll receive all the valuable therapies in the interviews and many more additional gifts and benefits. Your purchase will help us continue to bring this vital, important information to more people. Just click on one of the banners below and join us in our mission.